gentlemen, are you ready to start? Are you well fed? I'm sorry it's a bit hot in here. You hot? There's a man down here saying he's hot. Right, so I want to say that I'm trying to juggle Slido and a panel and the audience. And if you've ever been at an event at which I've moderated before, you will know that my style is to get out into the audience. So I've got board up here. So I'm going to be coming down into the audience. But can I just warn you something, is that I will cut you off short and demand your microphone back if you go on a bit. Just saying. Because I know that there are quite a lot of questions down there, and I would like to hear from lots of you. So we're going into a treatment and care session. Let's start with the treatment side of it. You've already met Luca Pani. Tell us who you are and your take.
Hello, my name is Amy Bilderbeck. I'm an experimental psychologist by background, and I now work at a small company based in the UK called Pivotal. Pivotal does a number of threads of work that are relevant to this panel, but broadly speaking, what we try to do is to take ideas from cognitive psychology and neuroscience, bring it together with digital technology to try to solve questions that we think are pressing within healthcare, but also problems that are faced by the pharmaceutical industry. So as a small company, we focus on quite specific problems. And some examples of our work include, for example, development of a medical device, which can give an early indication as to whether an antidepressant is working for a particular individual or not. So an indication of non-response can mean that a medication can get changed at an early time point. This can be very important for patients and caregivers and result, of course, in better outcomes more quickly. We're also involved in the IMI project PRISM, where we provide cognitive psychology and neuroimaging tech for deep phenotyping, and that's in a piece of work where we're, of course, trying to look at social withdrawal as a transdiagnostic factor that might be relevant to the way we categorize mental health in the future and give us new targets for treatment. So overall, a number of things that we're interested in, but including helping improve treatment pathways, stratifying patients, redefining the way that we look at treatment targets, and doing that in a way that uses digital tech to be really scalable as well as really sensitive. And if I might finish by saying that for this panel, I'm particularly interested in the interface between the research that we do and how it gets implemented in healthcare systems. I don't think this gets always the attention that it deserves, and is something that we are learning the hard way, like many of our colleagues, I'm sure.
So implementation thing we'll come back to, I think, time and time again.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Diane Joris. I might be one of the only speakers who's local from Belgium, Brussels. I'm a mental health professional, and I'm specialized and passionate in clinical hypnosis. I used to work in a major cancer center in Houston, Texas, called the MD Anderson Cancer Center, where I was doing clinical hypnosis during surgeries for breast cancer and other invasive procedures. And several years ago, I wanted to automate this technique, which is really amazing, this clinical hypnosis technique. So I created with my co-founders On Comfort, which delivers digital sedation technology to relieve pain and anxiety without medication. So we combine clinical hypnosis with other psychological interventions into virtual reality clinical modules. So this is really an alternative. It is a new therapeutic options for clinicians to reduce anxiety and pain of patients during, before, and after medical procedures. So for those who don't know how it works, and you can come by and try afterwards, we give to doctors headsets, a total hardware which is completely adapted to the use in clinical settings, together with virtual reality modules, which are medical devices, and are available for different indications adapted to the age of the patient, and also for psychological interventions we need to have this available in several languages, which is the case. We have so far 8 different languages. So we were talking about research and the importance of evidence-based of digital therapeutics the whole morning. In our case, we have the chance to have more than 10,000 patients already treated with very high scores of satisfaction and comfort during medical procedures. And we have more than 2,000 patients enrolled or having been enrolled in clinical trials. And what we see is that we definitely impact the outcomes more than traditional sedation and traditional medication for anxiety and pain management and for sedation. We see an amazing reduction, a significant reduction in anxiety, in pain, in the consumption of post-operative opioids and other painkillers. And also, research confirms that we can adequately replace traditional sedation systems. So digital sedation is becoming the standard of care in major hospitals in Europe, across Europe now. So I'm really interested in discussing this because I think that's the mental health part and the integrated care, not only talking about, before we were talking only about biology and molecules years ago. We're talking now about healthcare, prevention, and so on. I think that's integrating the aspect of anxiety and mental health is really important.
Thank you very much. Matthew.
Hello, I'm Matthew Hotoff. I'm a psychiatrist and Director of Research at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology, Neuroscience and the Maudsley Hospital. I guess I'm in this space because of the problem we have as in mental health, where, you know, aside from other brain disorders, it's really difficult to get a handle on the phenotype. And in the sense that we now have these technologies which can provide this ability to stream information at scale and give potentially a readout of a load of higher CNS functions. So I'm Viabas' partner in crime as co-lead for the Radar CNS project, which is an IMI-funded program, which is all about using smartphones and wearable devices to track health. I guess one of my interests in what we've been talking about is, it goes back to Luca's early slide about the kind of demographic shift and the public health need. And I think the previous discussions we've had maybe haven't quite focused enough on the need for value in terms of doing this, because you potentially, with these technologies, you potentially trigger a whole load of behaviors which actually increase demand, not reduce it. Now, clearly that's going to be a problem. I've just come from a place, the other side of the world, where a psychiatrist, rather than getting the luxury of an hour to see a new patient, which I have, gets 15 minutes with a new patient and 7 minutes with a follow-up. And so in that kind of resource-poor setting, and in the setting I sit in, we've really got to demonstrate how these sorts of technologies actually could make one use that time more efficiently. And you can imagine ways of doing that, but they need to do that. And I guess digital interventions are one way in which one can actually provide greater reach to populations. I should say in this place I visited, there's a 2-year waiting list to get to see the psychiatrist in the first place.
And actually, something that Luca and I were discussing just before is that the things that you need to get out there, first of all, in terms of digital solutions, have to be the one that demonstrate value in terms of health systems. Because if they see it just, as you say, as being something that increases demand, the door will be shut to a lot of digital solutions, or maybe shut to all of them, unless you can really prove that that's of value.
If I may add on this, as much as medicine will change with the digitalization, also the payer side will change. And it will change in a manner in which I want to be disruptive up to the end. The value of a medicine will be formally zero. The value will be only a percentage of the amount of avoidable cost. So you have to certify it and negotiate with the payer upfront what are the percentage of the money you will save And actually, the payer can make the call, the company can make the call. It says, I'm sure I can certify this and you will give me 15%. I'll give you a short example. If when the hepatitis C negotiation came, I negotiated the largest market, the Italian market was the largest.
You headed the Italian
I had the
agency at the
Italian
time.
payer. If Gilead at that time, but others, would have come and said, look, don't give me any money, zero. Give me 15% of liver transplant that I save in 5 years. You know the amount of money they would have made? And nobody would have said anything, ever.
Right.
And if you come with this negotiator to me and you send a letter to the Minister of Economic, you are forcing me to negotiate. Because the minister will call and says, wait a second, he said 15%. It means 85% we save and we keep. You either go there now or I'm putting you in jail. So go. That is the level of engagement.
Francesca.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Francesca Sofia. I'm from Italy, and I'm representing the community. Actually, I'm bringing here the voice of the people with epilepsy. I am a neuroscientist by background, and I'm actually working as a Chief Scientific Officer for the Italian Epilepsy Federation. I'm also a member of the European Regional Executive Committee of the International Bureau for Epilepsy. By an irony of fate, I'm also a mother of a child with a severe form of epilepsy. Many years ago, I defended my PhD thesis, and it dealt with generalized epilepsy. And after several years, I became the mother of a child with this disease. So my life was, characterized by this irony. I'm very happy to be here and to be involved in this conversation, since I think epilepsy makes a case for digital revolution. We have reached a plateau in medicine development for epilepsy. And when I first confronted, I faced the diagnosis, I thought that I should do all I can to support research as a mother and also as a health and research manager and professional. After several years of working, advocating for more research, I am becoming aware that we want and having better solutions for the people with epilepsy if we continue to employ the same tools. We won't end up with new medication. We need to be very disruptive. And I think we can reach that point thanks to digital health technologies. I'm also sure that then can be a lot of money saved. And I can tell you a very short story that follows up what Lucas just said about money saving. I have been in the hospital with my daughter for the past week, since she needed to take a prolonged EEG, which cannot be taken at home in her real life settings. We stayed there for a whole week, and no episode happened. She didn't have a seizure. After she was released from the hospital, she had one. So I am wondering what would have been her EEG if it could be taken continuously. I think we should introduce this concept, and epilepsy is the right disease to make it working, the concept of continuomics. The capacity that digital tools will enable to continuously monitoring and tracking brain activity and helping us to understand what's going on in the brain of these children and adults with epilepsy. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very compelling case study there. Hugh.
Yes, hello. My name's Hugh Marston, so I look after translational neuroscience at Eli Lilly. I also have the pleasure of leading the PRISM project, which has been mentioned a number of times, and also with Jan Jensen sitting on one of the groups within FPO, which tries to channel these ideas that hopefully we're collecting together into projects going forward. So hopefully we can work with Pierre and Elisabetta to do that. My background's as a behavioral neuropharmacologist, and I've been working in the area of developing new CNS disorders for maybe 25, 30 years. Actually, some of the points you've just made, I think, are incredibly cogent, that we actually now have technologies at our grasp that enable us to actually understand the fundamental biology of what's going on in the real world of subjects, patients, and subjects may be better than patients on occasions because maybe it's prodromal. We can understand what the real-world etiology of these disorders are. Certainly, continuous EEG assessment in the home, I think, is just on the horizon, and I'm sure that will be leveraged into epilepsy, but that's the sort of thing we need to discuss. And as we can build those pictures of both understanding the pathology, the fundamental electrophysiology, the neurochemistry, the imaging, in a chronological aspect, looking at how disease changes, because again, often in neurodegenerative disease, for instance, somebody's pathological load may be significant, but it's constant. And if it's constant, probably they don't need therapy. If it's changing, they do. So there are many ways we can, I think, build ways that we can develop better treatments that actually are addressing the biological problem in the same way as the oncologists have moved much more into a rational world over the last 15, 20 years, and cardiovascular and respiratory disease was there, and that's where we need to take CNS disease.
So what do you think is needed for digital technologies to become part of the treatment possibilities for brain disorders?
We need to understand the patients and the prodromal subjects better so that we actually can design the appropriate therapy for that individual, then demonstrate with validated biomarkers it works, and then rely on our clinical colleagues to demonstrate that you get real-world benefit.
Matthew, how would that work in a hospital like yours? If somebody comes along and says, here's the digital solution, how would that be met?
Well, it might be met. I think it depends on the setting you're in and what the claim's being made. And I think there is a certain kind of there's a certain suspicion and weariness about sort of, shiny new tools which are less than well proven. But if we use digital technologies already in a range of different settings, and particularly, for example, in disorders like eating disorders, where you're wanting to be able to provide early interventions to people you wouldn't otherwise be able to bring into the clinic, and that's relatively straightforward to establish and get on the horizon. I think the question then comes down to specificity. It's always about specificity, that you have an indication for this technology which can work in this group of people, because otherwise you're dealing with something which is much more at the at-risk population or at the kind of care coordination level. And we have tools to do the care coordination, but that's, I think, different from the sort of treatment. So it is about specificity and about having a really clear rationale for what's being offered.
So very often it's not actually clinicians that have to be persuaded, it's hospital management. How do we go about persuading hospital management that digital tools are going to be effective?
I'm not sure if I agree with that diagnosis, actually. I think the hospital management, if you can provide something which shows patient benefit and improved efficiency, you don't have too much of a problem. I mean, the difficulty sometimes is persuading financially hard-pressed systems to actually make investments which they don't have a funding stream to do. But apart from that, actually, I don't think that's the problem. I think it is actually more probably people in my profession who recognise this as disruptive and can feel, I guess, potentially threatened. I mean, the problem it's not so much that they're feeling threatened as if there's going to be a sort of Uberization of care, because actually, there's such a dearth of resource that you have to see this as an enabler which provides better care to more people. Rather than something which is actually competing with care. Because I think a lot of what certainly mainstream inner city psychiatry at a place like the Maudsley is about, is dealing with people who are very unwell, and you know, and there's a degree of containment and treatment with sort of, you know, fairly heavy medications and so on, and you're not really in the space of providing something which is a digital solution.
But actually, if you could catch them earlier in the cycle of their disease, then that would be effective.
Absolutely, and you see this being done in bipolar disorder. You know, it's a fantastically good use case because you effectively you've got a disorder which relapses and remits. Each relapse is hugely expensive. If you can prevent a relapse by early recognition, that's hugely appealing. The challenge, though, it goes back to my original point. You have to have a very good signal. So, you know, if all you do is trigger signals saying, you know, this person needs X, Y, or Z. At the moment, you know, certainly in the NHS, our healthcare system is such that we can't provide appropriate care to a lot of people who are blindingly, obviously in need of care. So, you know, triggering things which actually make the healthcare system, you know, have to do yet more is not going to be particularly appealing.
So we're merely digitizing something that actually friends and family already see. So no doubt when somebody's in a relapsing stage of a disease like bipolar, then friends and family start to agitate and say, you must do something, you must do something. And actually all the digital solution is doing is replacing that cry for help, but without there being something to be done at the end, it's not that effective.
Well, it can, I think the other thing which digital can do is put the individual with the disorder in the driving seat. So, you know, a lot of people with established mental disorders, which are hugely stigmatized, are, you know, are disadvantaged in all sorts of ways in society, and they resent, you know, they may not have great relationships with their family, and they may see their family as being, you know, nagging them to take the pills, all the rest of it. But actually, you know, when well, if being able to socialize into a digital solution which allows them to manage their care better, that is empowering and useful for them.
How have you found the take-up of your digital sedation?
Yeah, to answer your question and add something to what you said, I think disruption is kind of difficult for doctors. Medical teams are established, they have established protocols. So when you come with something completely new, it's really important, one, to show that it's clinically proven, it's solid, not that you said something really like sparkling, but nothing's behind. And we were talking about the number of apps, health apps, actually currently available in the App Store. So I think you need to be very serious in the way you treat your medical device, the way you present it, and you need to offer a whole package to the doctors, meaning how to introduce it in the standard of care, how protocols to enter this into the normal flow of a clinic. And we all know that in every single government in Europe, there's enormous pressure over healthcare professionals. So time is key. And I think that having something that is simple, and we were talking this morning about patient-centered design, I think we need to think also about doctor-centered design. How to create something that doctors can use easily, and it's not, again, a new platform, and they don't remember the login, they don't remember the password, they don't know how to use it. I mean, we need to be educated by doctors as creators and pioneers in new technologies and disruptive initiatives. We need to be trained, I mean, to be in touch with doctors and really understand their needs to be able to, what do they need to implement a solution. And I think simplicity and really short time for introducing a new technology in the hospital are key to the development and the dissemination of new technologies.
Because it must have been a big sell to doctors to say, here I am, hello, I've got this thing that you just put on and it digitally sedates you. I mean, if somebody came to you and said, I've got this VR device, it'll digitally sedate you and then I can do surgery without anesthesia, how many of you would believe that straight off?
So actually the way we initiated this, I'm a mental health professional, this is my specialty, this is what I was doing. I just kind of created a digitalized and automated automated clinical hypnosis sessions. Clinical hypnosis is extensively illustrated in the medical literature, that there's nothing really new under the sun. The thing that's really new is about the automation and the fact that automation functions as good as one-on-one delivered hypnosis in the operating room. So we have years, decades of medical literature behind us in terms of one-on-one individual hypnosis during medical procedures and surgeries. And now we have, as I said, we have strong research behind us, which really helps for dissemination of the solution.
Okay, I'm now going to go down here into the audience, skipping up. Okay, thoughts from you and questions? See, you know you're not going to answer any questions now, are you? You rotten lot. Okay, this lady here, tell us who you are.
I'm Jannie van den Einden from the Organ on Chip Consortium in the Netherlands. I just put a question on the screen in order to emphasize that there is more than mobile phones and apps, and that the same technology that is used for those can also be used for developing like smart patches, implantables, and model systems like organs on chip to model these brain diseases and also see what the underlying mechanisms can be, so that we also think about this in the discussions about solutions for brain disease.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Now, I know we had somebody from a German regulator, where is he, who was talking to me earlier. Just give me your thoughts about, you were telling me about devices and in Germany.
Yes, thank you. I was, during the past sessions, I had some remarks, especially on the aspects that you mentioned on regulation and also on reimbursement of these devices. I'm coming from the German Federal Institute for Drugs and Medical Devices, and we are regulating drugs as well as medical devices. And within our own innovation office, we have quite a lot of contact to startups and research groups that want to develop digital solutions, diagnostic or therapeutic. And currently, these digital solutions are all regulated as medical devices. So their main questions usually are, the first one is, how can this be reimbursed? How can I earn money with that in the end? And the second one, of course, is how can I get guidance through regulation? And how can I bring my idea into a digital realization and then bring it through conformity assessment and on the market as a medical device? And second remark was to reimbursement, because this morning we had the discussion about how I can get reimbursement without evidence and how I can get evidence without reimbursement. So right now in Germany there's an approach and there's a regulatory draft on its way to Parliament where we as BfArM will have the opportunity to grant reimbursement to medical devices based on digital technology. And if there's not yet enough evidence for a benefit for our healthcare system, for example, we will be able to grant some kind of provisional reimbursement for 1 year to give the app or the other solutions the possibility to create and generate evidence during that time. So this could be an approach to at least go a step-by-step pathway to reimbursement and evidence at the same time. Thanks.
Luca, can I come to you on that? Because we've been talking, haven't we, about business models being one of the, or new models being part of the solution here. I mean, you were talking about your wonderful 15% or go to jail.
No, I know when I mention jail, I get attention. It's a trick. But it works. But I totally agree with the colleague. It's, first of all, it happens to me that the concept of medical devices and the regulated medical devices has been changing when the legislation was done. So perhaps IMI should, in a consortium way, foster this in front of the Commission and ask whether or not we should consider these digital tools as we were before. Because as the IMA made the comment, now if it was a device, you can say, okay, we don't regulate. But if this is a medical treatment, that has digital capability, then your arm of control is going to be the standard of care, unless you do an add-on to the existing one. But in some of these cases, this, as I said too quickly, I'm sorry, this can be the sole treatment, not an add-on. So it's going to be difficult for us even to think about this. This is a prescription that I prescribe, and I prescribe you an app or a game, and somebody is reimbursing this. And evidence must be there, of course. It's very difficult for companies like this, and also for the implementation into the hospitals. You need a regulatory background, also as a safeguard. Look, if nothing goes bad, everybody's happy. But if something goes wrong, they will come after you and they ask, why did you use this without any evidence, without any of this? Oh, because there was no regulation. I don't think this will work.
And also, I wanted to ask you about post-marketing surveillance. How do you do that with a digital product?
I'm not sure I can answer exactly this question, but I would like to add something. In the field of epilepsy, you also mentioned to me during the coffee break before, there are sensors. The point is that those cannot be used in clinical settings and in clinical research because they are not reliable, and they are not made more reliable because they are not used in clinical settings. This is a vicious circle that we need to break. That's the point. Yeah.
Let's ask the audience, how would you break that vicious circle? Because it is a real and genuine problem there. Anybody, any ideas? We have a microphone here. Yeah.
I think that, this is actually probably a question more from the regulatory side. I think in the US, they have something called an investigative device exemption, where you can take something which is not yet approved, by the regulators to really measure something clinically. You can put it in a real world setting, collect the data, treat it as essentially a research device, and show through that sort of data collection that it has the performance characteristics that you're looking for, and then seek formal approval. So I think that at the end of the day, we will need this kind of flexibility if we have to take devices that are very usable otherwise, right? And I think maybe another point, I think we have to think about how to take devices that are used by consumers, right? And create medical utility out of them and enable that data collection, because oftentimes if a device is made only for sort of clinical use in clinical trial settings, it just does not evolve as rapidly as it should. And this is something I think folks on the Excel side and others know very well. So I think some sort of an investigative use regulation that helps you collect the data for devices that are otherwise of high quality would be helpful.
But it goes back to the policy lever, really, doesn't it? If you included a digital device, there was an obligation to include a digital device in trials, then you would develop that information. Briefly here, then.
If you're talking about new technology like this getting in a catch-22, because you can't use it in a clinical environment because it hasn't got the evidence to enable to use it. And you can't do the latter because you don't have the evidence, right? So it's a catch-22. If you can do a feasibility study, that's what in some areas we do in different parts of the world, in a controlled environment, in partnership with the regulator fully aware and puts in the right controls, that will enable you to generate the first round of data that can then enable to inform the regulator to see what else needs to be done. I think the key words is controlled environment because you need to test it, but that also requires a partnership with the regulator in some form. It doesn't have to be seen as a product. It could be seen as a pilot, a feasibility study. There are different labels that you can use. But it needs that thinking up front. And I just want to end by saying a lot of the new tools that we think about doesn't get enough regulatory shaping at the start of the program. We think about it as an outcome, too late in the process. And I think that's a piece I would say, if you want to be innovative, think about how this could be a usable product for a customer. It could be a patient, it could be a subject.
I think that's incredibly important. Make friends with a regulator. Corinne, you've got a lot of friends coming your way.
Since I'm here to provoke, I would like to provoke a little. You know, just an observation. I did not have the feeling in these discussions here in the past of my IMI project at Ionomy, and never in time that the regulators would push and moderate the process of uptake and early involvement, as it was just mentioned, at any time. I haven't seen that. I see them, in the best case, respond to something that happens. But I mean, you are asking us to make suggestions how we get out of the vicious circle. Why don't you ask the regulators?
Well, do you know, I was just going to go to Corinne de Vries here, who's kind of going purple because she wanted to say something.
Thank you. So thank you for the comment. I don't know when you last tried, but we are actively inviting every IMI project to come at the start of their project to the European Medicines Agency, to the Innovation Task Force, to help us understand what are you developing, and then to invite them for a dialogue to make sure that we can help make sure that whatever you're developing reaches patients. And part of it is educating us, part of it is helping academics who are part of these consortia understand what we would need from a regulatory perspective. And so who is in it? Amy, your question of sometimes this frustrating perception. We are as frustrated as you are that all this money is being spent and there's not enough coming to patients that we believe should be coming to patients. And I've lost my train of thought now.
Anyway, there's coffee and apple cake waiting for you in Amsterdam. Right. Okay, let's take some more questions.
Vivian, can I make a comment on this?
Yes.
Quick. I mean, Corinne is right. We urge you to come for the qualification advice and then the opinion and the qualification program at FDA. Now, if you have no money and you cannot get any normative data, I understand is a little difficult. But I can tell you, Martin, something that happens. In 2011, we released a quite important, at the time, qualification opinion on the level of the amyloid beta 142 that was required. We specifically said this to enrich the clinical trial. That's what we said, you know, and that's what I said today. In the beginning, these tools don't go for primary exclusive. It's going to be a bloodshed. They can be, you know, adjunctive as secondary. Before you knew, all the companies were already selecting this as a total population. And we understand why. Because, of course, you restrict the label, right? So you restrict the money you can make out of it. And so the exercise has darkness inside, which value of investment is also involved. With digital, pure digital, and what I'm talking is biological, it even amplifies. Because of the risk, as Raj was saying, you know, the feasibility, who pays for the feasibility, I have a qualification, I have no qualification. It's really a catch-22, very difficult to solve. But it won't hurt to speak early, you know, and get scientific advices early. For small, medium enterprises for free also.
Amy, did you find that? Did you have early discussions with regulators?
I think in some of our projects we did, and in others we didn't. And the difference between how that work has gone has been really very evident. I was also scribbling here while people were speaking. We've spoken quite a lot about the regulatory aspects, but interwoven with that is the sense of how we embed our tech into the healthcare systems that we are intimately working with. This is more relevant perhaps for some digital innovations than others, but it's been very relevant to ours because what we're trying to do is to drive prescription changes. So immediately you have to partner with your prescribing physicians, GPs, psychiatrists, etc. And in doing feasibilities and pilots, of course, you can engage with regulators to help shape that process, but you also learn an incredible amount from going out and saying, okay, this is my test bed, it's this CCG in the UK. Thankfully, we have some processes to engage with test beds in the UK. And immediately they start to have new ideas about how we use our digital tech. So in that example, they were interested in our system, but not the pieces of it that we'd spent 15 years developing. But they were saying, well, we have multidisciplinary teams that want to use your system as a kind of portal to draw together all these different forms of care, provide a more holistic approach for a walk-in depression clinic in this case. So it's going in rather a different direction than we had anticipated. And I think this is really positive. So I would leave that comment there.
And there's always that thing, you walk into one place and they say, ooh, it'll never work in Amsterdam, or whatever it is. There's always a place it won't work for. A brief.
Brief, yes. I'm the head of the memory clinics in Lausanne University Hospital, and we are involved in the human brain project, several IMIs such as EPAD, AMIPAD, etc. But we are also involved in cognitive and physical training using tablets. So I wanted just to draw your attention to the fact that there are other funding mechanisms in the EU other than the IMI, but it would be interesting to bridge over the two systems maybe, because we got a significant grant from the EU through the AAL, the Active and Assisted Living mechanism. I'm sure many people are aware of in the audience, and I think it's important because probably the two programs could be linked together to the benefit of our patients.
Okay, thank you. There's a question there.
Yes. Hello, Majid Hehi. I'm from CALETI, which is a research technology organization based in Grenoble, France. So I have a question and a quick comment that maybe we'll have some answers. So the question is to Dr. Marston. We're in the treatment session. In your opinion, from where will the next treatment breakthrough come from? And my comment from a research technology organization is technology is not technology. Beware of consumer-developed technology. It can be good, but really a device that's for leisure is not meant to do continuous monitoring of EEG. I'm really thinking about what you said, Dr. Sophia. So maybe co-creation and thinking about co-developing either specifically or hacking existing technology, but really with a purpose from the start could be an answer. That would minimize cost at the end, because if you develop a device and at the end the software is not corrective enough, it's useless.
Okay, thank you very much.
So if I can respond to that question, I think it's an entirely legitimate one. Certainly the pharma industry really over maybe as long as 40 years hasn't come up with anything transformative either in psychiatry or neurology. I think a lot of that is actually the theme I've been playing for a while, that I'm not sure that we actually understand the disease in the patient. We've based it on a symptomatic classification. We haven't really understood what the biology is. I mean, actually in our introduction you were mentioning about the nun who had lots of amyloid in her brain but she didn't have dementia. So Aloysius Alzheimer's would define her as having Alzheimer's, but she didn't, because we don't really understand Alzheimer's at the moment. It's not one disorder, it may be many. We need to understand how amyloid, tau, alpha-synuclein, all these things interact as we move forward. So understanding the patient, using the sorts of technologies we're talking about, whether it's imaging, whether it's EEG, measuring these in the real world rather than the lab setting when somebody's personal profile may be very different. That, I think, will identify systems and circuits that drug discovery scientists such as I can develop new approaches, or we can work with the clinicians with classical approaches, which maybe when we actually can stratify the patient population appropriately, many of the molecules and approaches we've had may actually work if we take it to the right patient and measure it in the right way. So I'm very positive that there are ways forward, but I think we've got to work out how we integrate all these various different parameters so we actually understand the patient in a different way than we did at the back end of the Victorian age.
And somebody made a very interesting comment about it with regards to autism, about neurotypical versus atypical. You know, what is the what is the difference? I mean, do we even know? I mean, we're lacking some really basic and fundamental information here.
We do need to facilitate our clinical colleagues to go and understand what's wrong with their patients at a biological level. And that will then lead us forward. I mean, epilepsy is a very good example. If we can get real-world EEG so that your daughter can actually get the precise prodrome up to the point where a fit occurs, and we can understand those parameters, maybe that helps us understand the disease and come up with a better therapeutic.
Quick comment from you, Tia, then I want to go to your wishes.
I'll be quick. That will change the way we interpret epilepsy and the way we treat epilepsy. It can teach us about the biology, and eventually we would end up treating epilepsy as an acute disease once we will be able to predict, for example, other than treating it like a chronic disease as it is now. So it can be a huge impact also in terms of economic savings and quality of life improvement.
Matthew, quick comment from you.
It is just a quick comment. I guess a lot of what we've been talking about has been quite. One of the comments on the screen was at high level. I guess there are, to me, in a purely kind of maybe a self-indulgent research way, the beauty of a lot of these technologies is giving you an insight into potentially the biological mechanisms and the nuts and bolts of what's going on in a disorder. I'm interested in depression, but it could be any disorder, and seeing what happens, what correlates with change, what behaviors and cognitive processes are actually underlying. So I think there's a kind of discovery element of these technologies which perhaps hasn't been brought out as much as we might have.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think, with artificial intelligence as well, it's what remains to be discovered by AI. I mean, that's a hugely exciting question for the future. But
AI is unbiased, so your point's well made.
Yeah. So let's now go for your one wish for IMI. Let's start with you, Hugh.
I think, to maintain my theme, I think we need to try and understand the patient better. I think perhaps the only thing we need to think about as we move into new horizons is that the current funding cycle is a 3 to 5 year cycle. A lot of the disorders we're talking about, neurodegenerative disease, if you monitor a patient for 2 years, you may not have got any change at all if you're looking at the cyclical aspects of bipolar or something like this. So having longitudinal data sets that show us change and how these parameters can interact with change may need a longer horizon of funding and a longer horizon of aspiration, how we can collect that data, curate it, understand it, drive new hypotheses out of it.
Francesca, I'm presuming for you it's going to be the continuous EEG monitor.
Yeah, that's of course the center of my thinking and effort at the moment. And I also believe that we do need to become partners of those developers who are working on continuomics, continuous EEG monitoring. So far, we are just customers, and I can say that patients are eager to try everything that comes to the market, but they have to be guided. That's why we also need to break the vicious circle and involve the patients in the evaluation and implementation of those tools. IMI can help a lot by providing incentives for collaborative research involving all stakeholders, including digital developers and patients, of course, because they directly reported outcomes can change the way tools are designed, and that's what I would suggest.
Thank you. Matthew?
Well, I'll change tack, because a lot of what's been said so far I completely agree with, but I guess I'm a psychiatrist who works clinically in the interface between medicine and mental health, physical and mental health. And I think that interface is incredibly important. It might not have been brought out enough. And I suppose, one of the comments earlier was, is this brain health or digital, and why is it brain health and digital? Why is it not health and digital? Because I see the digital as being an enabler to be able to get a handle on the kind of behavioral, cognitive, physiological processes we're interested in mental health, but actually apply across the board. So I suppose my plea for IMI is to think about ways in which this can be integrated, in trials, in observational studies, and so on, in a whole range of different disorders. Because the problem for mental health, and it's a very serious problem, is a sort of very substantial lack of funding, lack of research funding. I don't like saying that when I'm being given wonderful, substantial support from IMI, but it's true across the sector. And there are huge leads which can be derived from understanding what happens in mental health and the kind of physiological, cognitive, behavioral parameters when you're studying a novel compound in maybe immunology or oncology. And I think there's opportunities here which are too often missed. So I'd plea for researchers, for research funders to be thinking about the ways in which you can leverage more by thinking across disease.
Okay, Diane.
From my side, the standard of research, the highest standard of research with this request, that's more and more is randomized clinical trials, multi-centric with different countries in Europe. When we talk about cognitive interventions in psychological and psychiatric disorders, we often talk about therapies, type of CBT or acceptance and commitment therapies. Here, I think the digital has a lot to do, but we need to take into account the cultural diversity of the population we're working with. We're not the United States. We have so many languages and so many very different countries. So I think that having a platform and a help to develop a support from IMI to develop this cultural fitness would be amazing.
Okay, thank you very much. Amy.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this topic. I guess I've already said something about how I think it's important to pay attention to the healthcare environment that we're putting our digital tech in. And in a broad way, I think what I'm thinking here is I would really like to see, we think as researchers that we're very disruptive with our digital tech, and we are, but I would like to see IMI pushing us to be more disrupted as well, actually, by factors like where we need to be agile and change position in response to our healthcare systems, but also, paying closer attention to patient need from their perspective, especially given that digital tech, many aspects of digital tech interventions will rely on self-management and aspects of responsibility taking on behalf of the individual for the way that they work and the way that they bestow their benefits. It's going to be much more powerful if those individuals can see those changes happening in domains that they really care about. And sometimes I think as researchers we can get a little bit our own pet loves, and we forget to keep these things in perspective.
And that's incredibly important, that this should be needs-led and what the patient needs are, rather than just what happens to be, as you say, the pet thought of the researcher.
Yes, exactly, and it's a very easy trap to, well, speak for myself anyway, a very easy trap to fall into.
Luca.
Yeah, of course my recommendation would be invest in the digital, but this is goes without saying. I had a very nice proposal that was stolen by the question there about the microbiota, the digital and the CNS, which we haven't discussed. It's extremely complicated, but if there is a possible approach, can be only by the digital bioinformatics and computer power. That's the only thing that can mirror, even at a distance, the complexity of the microbiota because of the numbers. The other two things I thought about in the digital was, about 100 years ago, Emil Kraepelin, a prominent German psychiatrist, published one of his books on dementia praecox and manic depressive insanity. And what he said by the observation of these patients in this asylum for decades, he said, it comes to me to understand that the brain is regulated only by the human brain, is regulated only by three waves. And he called them the will, the intellect, and the passion that now we have converted into of course, energy, so the activity, the cognition, as Tom was saying, Hugo was saying, I think, and mood. I would like to see a tablet, a platform, in which these three waves are constantly populated by, as was said, by sensors, by implants, by anything, and we could follow in a regulatory certified environment what happens, so that we can use these three fundamental waves. And the other thing, I don't know if I might...
But what's the IMI project in that?
It would be to implement this by using and enforcing regulatory certified data, because otherwise we will gather zillions of data, which I think I convince you. But I don't know how much of this data you can use, you know, and then we need strong evidence-based foundation. Look, it's better to have 10,000 pieces of data which are solid, biometrically identified, that a billion data that is completely dirty, at least to start with the hypothesis. Then you have the null hypothesis, then you elongate. IMI could really implement this because it needs regulators, it needs payers, it needs commission to do this.
And it needs the proper ontology so that that data is collected.
Yeah. And another thing, and I don't know if IMI has already funded this, did we find anything about headaches ever? The digital counterfact of headaches. Headaches is I didn't know. When I took this position in Modena, where there is the pharmacology center for headaches, I've seen the amount of patients that there is with headaches in Europe. Then I start studying the prevalence. It's devastating in Europe and in the world. You know, 15% of the total European population suffer from this. This is forget quality of life. You cannot do anything for days sometimes when you have the chronic migraine and, you know, the muscular tension and all the other thing. I didn't even know. Sorry, my ignorance. But something we should address. And the digital technology can help a lot on this.
If you look at the Lancet Burden of Disease study, it's right up there, third or fourth, after back pain and depression.
Sorry, guys. And you thought I knew something. I know nothing. I know nothing.
Thank you. After we've established that you know nothing, which I don't believe for an instant, Luca, we're going to thank this panel and bring on our next panel, which is on care. So thank you very much indeed.